write, to read, to drink a few drinks, smoke a few cigarettes, and do the right thing. Well, I guess at the time what he thought was the right thing. Now remember, he's met Ginny, and he really likes her. It's not a bad broad. So, they marry June 8th. And they decide they're going to settle in San Francisco. So, now remember, he's still journaling, he's still writing frantically. And during this period of time, 57, he writes The Return of the River. And they have finalized a residence in the Castro at this point in time. And in 1958, he actually gets The Return of the River published and Galilee Hitchhiker published. Now, he writes and publishes Galilee Hitchhiker in that same year. 1959, Richard writes and publishes The Lay Marble Tea. And he's actually making money, which is something that he's never done before. And he's not making a great deal of it, but he's actually making money. So 1960, March 25th, 1960, his wife gives birth to his only child, Leah Elizabeth Brautigan, in San Francisco. And at this particular point in time, they both begin to become involved in the burgeoning San Francisco counterculture scene. Each of them for different reasons. Ginny for equality and feminism, and Richard for easy women and drugs. Because those are the things that he liked about the movement. He also started his own scene within a writing group and a spoken word group called the Diggers, which consisted of many incredible people at the time, Kerouac being one of them, Bukowski being another, many of what we would consider today the big boys of the postmodernist movement in writing. He also begins to write for a communication company, the Underground Press, and for John Lowenson, who essentially puts all of his family's money into this counterculture scene, specifically for writers and artists. And he being Richard, becomes poet in residence at Caltech. With this poet in residency, he gets his first professional gig as arts writer for the Rolling Stone, a brand new magazine for its time, and creates Apple Records. This is all in 1960. In 1961, which was one of his least productive years of his life, it spent really involving himself in the counterculture and finding himself too deep in drug and alcohol use. And he quantifies 1961 as his most unhealthiest year of his life. This is a man who had many, many, many unhealthy years. So I'm assuming a lot of bad shit went down, and he did not write a thing in his journal. So we don't have a clue what went on. And in 1962, Ginny, who was tired of it, she couldn't live with it, she demanded him to make something of it and stop going so hard on the drugs and the alcohol. She packed her bags and left, and she moved to Hawaii. And she became famous in her own right. A leading feminist in the West, a collective writer for a lot of feminist journals, and she ended up moving on and moving to Menai, Hawaii. And this gives her daughter an opportunity to live in both worlds, although she chose to live with her father. And Richard took that on. Unlike a lot of the men of his time, he's one of the few writers that actually took on his offspring. I wonder why. Most of the other writers really had no care for them. So, I'm sorry. So anyways, in 1960, he also writes The Octopus Frontier, and it's published in 1960 and then republished in the late 2000s. While he's separated from Adler, he is pretty much stationary with some visits to other places. But he's pretty much stationary in San Francisco. And this is his time of writing. Between 1962 and I would say 1970, he wrote most of his stuff. And I'm just going to give you a short list. In 67, he wrote Trout Fishing in America, as well as all the watched by the Machines. In 68, in the Watermelon, in Watermelon Sugar, and Please Plant This Book. In 69, The Pill versus Spring Hill Mine Disaster. In 70, Rommel Drives on the Deep into Egypt, which I believe was read by Dan. And in 71, the abortion. In 1970, his divorce is finalized, so it took quite a bit of time. He really didn't want to. He really loved Jenny. He wasn't really interested in divorcing her, and he was actually the guy who held up the process. But anyways, between 1969 and 1972, he began to hang out in Canada, British Columbia, and the Yukon. And Peter had mentioned this. While Peter was in graduate school, Brautigan was hanging out on that same campus, on again, off again, hanging out with like-minded individuals, and founded a writing institution right there in British Columbia. So, 1971, he writes Loading Mercury with a Pitchfork. That's when he completes that year in 71. In 1974, The Hawkland Monster, a Gothic Western. Now I want to bring up his style, because at this point in time, his style changes. For earlier on, he was writing realism in almost a black comedy satire way. But at this point in time, he joins a whole new flux in postmodernist writing, and that's called fabulation. And he really becomes the leader in fabulation. What is fabulation? Is exactly what it is. It's the fantastical of reality. Okay? And his time, in his on again, off again time in British Columbia and in Mexico, brings on this idealism, this even Eastern philosophy, and it becomes almost fantastical and fabulous. Unlike Jack Kerouac, who had a base in faith, he was not brought up with any standard religious practice. So what he was able to do is he was able to mesh together his own life experience and Eastern philosophy. And one of his, I guess, jokes or claims to fame is, if I were to join a church, it would be Unitarianism over anything else. But who the hell would want to join a church that believes in almost nothing? Now, as a Unitarian, I find that offensive. But he's right to a particular point. Anyways, this fabulation comes out in a lot of his books in the mid to late 70s. Sombrero Fallout, Dreaming of Babylon. And then he's back to reality again. He pushes himself back to reality again because he finds a new woman. He's living in 1975, 76. He moves to Tokyo. And he decides, hell, I'm going to do something here. And by the way, he went there on a whim. It really was a whim. Now, some people say he went there by tram. I'm not sure if that's true or not. He might have gone there by plane. I don't know, and I don't know if, Dan, do you know of his potential travel there? He flew, okay. Well then, again, back to fabulation. A nice tram ride to Tokyo back in 1970s would probably be cool. But anyhow, so he's hanging out there. He's uncomfortable. He's lost. But he really wants something. And I don't think he knows what he wants and why he wants it. But he's there wanting it. And he meets a Japanese-born gal who actually lived in the United States for a period of time. Having a hard time with the name. Akoko Yoshimura. Now, what's interesting about her, she came from incredible wealth in Japan and Hollywood, American Hollywood. And I think this gave him the opportunity that he was looking for to get into meeting other writers, because he felt he was stuck in San Francisco. He was in a rut, and like Juju said, his critiques were terrible. The only person that gave him a great critique was a fellow by the name of Louis Auchincloss from the East, who said his writing in form is beautiful. What he writes about means nothing. Oh, so, okay, it looks pretty on paper. And as Dan Stephen just pointed out, what was his reply? Fuck you. So, anyhow, she really motivates him, and this is at a point in time where he's hanging out in Montana. He meets a ton of people, a whole class of people that we call the Key West writers, most of whom are still alive today. And he also meets the Hollywood set, which brings his poems and his novels out onto the forefront and into what would be considered at the time mainstream, even though he's still considered counterculture. So all of this occurs, and in 1980, his marriage to Akoko ceases to exist. And it all revolves around the fact that he, as his mother said, a great drinker. Remember, she never said that about him, but said that about her last husband. So during this period of time, from from the early 1980 to 1982, he's meeting and hanging out with a bunch of different women, all of which, just to let you know, all of his girlfriends are photographed on the front cover of every single work he ever produced, even if it was in short form, be it large books or be it just little pamphlets. And a lot of it, there are lots of different things about this. Some people say, well, he did it just to make sure he could get a little bit, get a piece of two. But I really believe that he wanted to honor these women, because that's the one thing that he lacked from his mother, is that woman was not a very good mother, but he had to honor them. And I'm absolutely, I absolutely believe that. So anyways, right now we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with a set of Peter's selections. No? Okay. We'll be back with a set of Juju's selections. All right, thank you.